Order, please. We'll now begin with the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions. The Honourable Member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a petition. The operative clause states, "We petition ask the Nova Scotia Legislature to ensure federal and/or provincial prosecutors do not prosecute medicinal cannabis outlets storefronts in the province of Nova Scotia." This petition has 3 signatures, and I have affixed my signature to the petition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Petition is tabled. The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a petition, the operative clause of which reads as follows. Whereas the population of Nova Scotia is aging and one of the fastest proportional rates in Canada, the need for forms of medical services is also increasing at an alarming rate, and the need to ease of access to a major medical facility is becoming increasingly urgent outside the city proper. There are 44 signatures, and I have affixed mine as per the rules of the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I'll accept the petition under advisement and come back to you. We'll now move on to presenting reports of committees. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas from September 13 to the 16th, 28 Nova Scotian paddlers joined Team Canada competing in the 2018 Pan American Canoe Sprint and Para Canoe Championships taking place in Dartmouth on Lake Bannock. And whereas the championships will feature over 16 countries, 350 athletes from North and South America facing off in the spectacle of world-class sport. And whereas our Nova Scotia athletes inspire all of us with their athleticism, hard work and dedication in their years of training, striving to be the best. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly join me congratulating our Nova Scotia athletes, Team Canada, and wishing them best of luck in the 2018 Pan American Canoe Sprint and Para Canoe Championships, and thanking the families, coaches, volunteers and sponsors for their role in supporting and empowering our athletes. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. With all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas bullying today goes far beyond the playground, campus or workplace, and whereas smartphones, social media and the anonymity of the online world has created increasing opportunity for cyberbullying and the unwanted sharing of intimate images, the impacts of which can be devastating for victims, and whereas the Intimate Images and Cyber Protection Act was adopted in response to the growth of these issues, providing victim access to free dispute resolution services from the province's dedicated cyberscan unit and the ability to obtain protection orders through the courts. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in recognizing the importance of this issue and the dedication of staff in helping to combat cyberbullying and the unwanted sharing of intimate images and better support victims. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. It is agreed. With all those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas lacrosse has a long and unique history in North America, originating with our Indigenous peoples, and whereas the National Lacrosse League is the largest men's professional indoor lacrosse league in North America and has recognized Halifax as a great event city and worthy of a professional franchise. And whereas the addition of a new sport and league like the one we are celebrating today will bring us together, build community pride, continue to increase the economic benefits of sport. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the legislature join me in acknowledging and congratulating Kurt Stiers for his leadership and vision in bringing a professional National Lacrosse League franchise to Halifax and the Scotiabank Centre for the 2019-2020 season. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a waiver of notice, passage without debate. There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas tissue donation and transplants impact hundreds of lives in Nova Scotia each year, and whereas the Nova Scotia Medical Examiner Service and Nova Scotia Health Authority Tissue Bank strive to fulfill end-of-life wishes and recover critical tissues while providing the best possible care and support for recipients and families, and whereas a unique partnership was marked today which has resulted in the first dedicated tissue recovery suite in Canada within a medical examiner's jurisdiction, helping to achieve system efficiencies like tissue access recovery time. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in recognizing the work of the Medical Examiner Service under the leadership of Dr. Matt Bowes and that of Harold Taylor, Service Manager with the Nova Scotia Health Authority Tissue Bank, to improve transplant patient care. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today we recognize Stand Up Against Bullying Day and send a strong message against bullying in Nova Scotia schools, colleges and universities. Whereas on this day we affirm our commitment to stop bullying and respond effectively to unacceptable behaviours, including bullying, cyberbullying, violence and all forms of harassment. And whereas government will commit to continue to support the development of safe, inclusive and caring school environments where all students are safe, engaged and able to learn, therefore be resolved that all members of this House acknowledge Stand Up Against Bullying Day and the commitment and dedication of our students, teachers and educational staff who work to eliminate bullying in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Protect Animals and to Aid Animals in Distress.
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Protect Animals and to Aid Animals in Distress.
Bill number 27, entitled An Act to Protect Animals and to Aid Animals in Distress.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish an Environmental Bill of Rights.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Establish an Environmental Bill of Rights.
Bill number 28, entitled An Act to Establish an Environmental Bill of Rights.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code, respecting leaves of absences.
The Honourable Minister of Labour and Advanced Education begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code.
Bill number 29, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 246 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Labour Standards Code.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I make an introduction first, please?
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, I'd like to draw everybody's attention to two people who are here from the Ecology Action Centre. We have Stephen Thomas and Megan McMorris, and I'd like to give them the warm welcome of the House. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 2007, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 2007, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act.
Bill number 30, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 7 of the Acts of 2007, the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make another introduction, please.
Permission granted.
Thank you. I'd like to take everybody's attention again to the West Wing, and I want to send a very warm welcome to Dr. Ingrid Waldron, who is here, who started the Enrich program and also worked with me on this bill I'm about to introduce. That's a warm welcome. Thank you. I'd like to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Redress Environmental Racism.
The honourable member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Redress Environmental Racism.
Bill number 31, entitled An Act to Redress Environmental Racism.
Ordered that the bill be read a second time on a future day. We'll now move on to notices of motion. Statements by members. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today we mark Stand Up Against Bullying Day. It's a chance to send a strong message that bullying is not acceptable. In 2007, the province proclaimed the second Thursday at the start of each school year as Stand Up Against Bullying Day, after Central King Rural High School students Travis Price and David Shepherd rallied behind a student who was being bullied for wearing a pink shirt. I am proud to say that more than a decade later, the movement that Travis and David started is still alive and growing. I am disappointed that bullying and cyberbullying continue to be a devastating issue for so many Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, today I am proud to thank Travis and David for taking a stand and beginning a movement. And I want to urge all Nova Scotians to do everything they can to stop bullying in our beautiful province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, today as we watch anxiously to see if the preparations for Hurricane Florence are adequate to spare human life, or as we look forward to a weekend swim in a warmer than usual ocean, we owe a debt of gratitude to Nova Scotians who continue to talk about climate change and to act to mitigate it, even as the province of Nova Scotia does not. I am particularly grateful to Stephen Thomas, the Energy Campaign Coordinator at the Ecology Action Centre, for building relationships and consensus with a wide array of organizations who collectively made the 2030 declaration on the grounds of the Hope Blooms Greenhouse in Halifax Needham on the blisteringly hot morning of August 30th. The Canadian Federation of Students, the Nova Scotia Federation of Labour, the Centre for Local Prosperity are just some of the signatories to the declaration that calls for a 50% reduction in Nova Scotia's greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 in a way that promotes climate justice and sustainable economic prosperity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to make an introduction. We have a guest here from in the East Gallery, Ciro Comencini, who is who owns. I'll read his. Benvenuto, Ciro. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce Ciro Comencini, who chose Canada as his new home. He immigrated to Nova Scotia from Verona, Italy 5 years ago. He purchased a farm in Hants County and opened Ciro Roma Cheese Limited in 2013. Ciro has been making cheese since he was 5 years old. Ciro says all he wanted was to continue his family legacy and make a decent living in Canada. His cheese products have made their way to the Dartmouth Alderney Landing Farmers Market, the Halifax Seaport Market, and numerous high-end restaurants in HRM. I am happy to say I have tried his delicious fresh mozzarella, scaramorza, burrata, ricotta, e asiago. Ciro and his lovely wife, Alessia, have 6 children, all under the age of 14, and are expecting number 7 in October. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House join me in congratulating Ciro on his successful business and for bringing his beautiful family to Nova Scotia. Ti auguriamo il meglio per tutte le tue future imprese. We wish you all the best in your future endeavors, Ciro. Grazie.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the past 20 years, the Bedeck Gathering Cayleys has provided entertainment for locals and visitors alike at St. Michael's Parish Hall in Bedeck. The Cayleys were launched by Nancy McLean in 1998, starting in a small way, but now has 80 shows scheduled each year. Mr. Speaker, none of this would be possible but for the passion and dedication of Miss McLean, who continues to greet guests as they arrive, 7 days a week throughout July, August, and the first 3 weeks in September. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of the House to join me in congratulating Nancy McLean on the 20th anniversary of the Bedeck Gathering Cayleys, to thank her for all she has done over those years and wish her the very best in the years ahead. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, last month my constituency was informed through the news that 5,000 litres of oil had spilled into the harbour from Tufts Cove. Almost half a month later, it was revealed that an additional 9,900 litres had spilled into the containment trench. The fact that the information surrounding this environmental disaster was less than forthcoming is extremely troubling. 2 weeks is 2 weeks too long to inform a community of an oil spill on its shores. If this is the standard that is set as the government toys with issuing offshore exploration permits, then I would say we have a real problem in Nova Scotia. I'm thankful that the oil spill in Dartmouth North was recovered quickly and that the response was immediate, but the lack of transparency around these issues raises many questions among my community members. I hope this government and the Minister of the Environment in the future will commit to demanding a higher standard for companies operating in our province.
The honourable member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate Scott Black of Sydney on his induction into the Nova Scotia Softball Hall of Fame. Scott Black is a founding member of the Alexander Street White Sox, which was founded in 1984. And before coaching the team, currently he pitched for 15 years. The Alexander Street White Sox have hosted a number of tournaments here in the community, at the provincial level, winning in 2012 and 2017, and as well they've hosted 8 intermediate championships here in the community. One of the highlights for Scott was in 1992 when he captured the Eastern Canadian Intermediate C Men's Championships. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place today to thank Scott Black for his commitment to fastball in our community and keeping ball alive. I ask all the members to congratulate him on his induction into the Nova Scotia Softball Hall of Fame.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Derek Pierre and Jenna Tate, co-owners of Pier 15, are members of the Pictou County Ride the River Committee that hosted a new event in Glasgow on August 25th. The event for kayakers, canoeists and paddleboarders took place in the East River. Participants experienced a unique perspective of the county's natural beauty, as well as the fun of participating in the first what will hopefully become an annual event. Participants sailed from the marina to Raspberry Island for a barbecue before returning to the marina for an evening of great local entertainment provided by Mike and McPherson's. Committee member Greg Burrows was very optimistic about this new event, an opportunity for exercise, fun and socializing. Congratulations to all committee members for thinking outside the box, a new perspective to engage our community in healthy activity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, one of the best parts of being MLA for Dartmouth South is being continuously inspired by the work of the members of my constituency. Dartmouthians are ingenious self-starters. Today, as I wonder how our southern neighbours will fare in the wake of Hurricane Florence, or how our western neighbours facing raging forest fires are coping, I'm inspired by the quiet steps Dartmouthians take to heal our natural world. The Oat Hill Lake Society, a group of neighbours and friends, was formed in 2010 to restore the ecological health of Oat Hill Lake. Through public education, partnership with HRM, and hands-on labour, this group of citizens have made Oat Hill Lake a safe and sustainable place to swim and enjoy for everyone in the community. It's no exaggeration to say that Oat Hill Lake is a gem in Dartmouth. It's a place to cool off, recreate, and get away from the hustle of the city, all within walking distance of the downtown core. Thank you to the Oat Hill Lake Conservation Society for preserving the integrity of this piece of nature for all to enjoy, and for showing us that even in a small way we can be a force for positive change in the face of environmental challenges.
The honourable member for Fairview Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Yara Yazbek and Renee McLeod for being elected as co-presidents for the upcoming school year at Halifax West High School. Each year, 2 students are elected as co-presidents of the student government at Halifax West, and this year both Yara and Renee had that pleasure. Both girls served as grade 10 and 11 reps, which allowed them to gain valuable experience that will ensure they do an excellent job in their new positions. Halifax West has had one of the strongest student governments in the province for decades, including my own, with successes including raising tens of thousands of dollars for the Terry Fox Foundation through their annual fundraiser, Head for a Cure. But Yara and Renee are sure to have a busy senior ahead of them by juggling both academics and extracurriculars. However, with the help of their executive and student government advisors new to the position this year, Madame Fougere and Madame Goura, there is no doubt Halifax West will continue their legacy of success. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of this House of Assembly join me in recognizing Yara Yazbek and Renee McLeod and wishing them a very productive and fun school year. Thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, September 16th, people across Canada will take part in the Terry Fox Run. Almost 40 years ago, Terry Fox ran 5,373 kilometres over 143 days. He ran a marathon every day, showing Canadians that with an unbreakable spirit, improbable dreams can become realities. Mr. Speaker, I'm honoured to serve as an ambassador for the Terry Fox Foundation. Cancer has touched all of our lives in some way, but we continue to get closer to a cure because of people like Terry Fox and the amazing efforts of the Terry Fox Foundation. Since he started his Marathon of Hope, his story has inspired millions around the world, and the Terry Fox Foundation has raised and continues to raise millions of dollars for cancer research. Terry taught us that anything is possible if you try. The Marathon of Hope continues. I ask all members of this House to join me in taking part in a Terry Fox run in their community this weekend. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Mr. Speaker, the the Atlantic Film Festival, opens tonight with Splinters, a film by Halifax Needham resident Tom Fitzgerald. A film based on a screenplay by a Nova Scotian, Leanne Poole, shot in Nova Scotia and featuring a largely Nova Scotian, entirely Atlantic Canadian cast, including Halifax Needham residents Stuart Legier and Mary Colin Chisholm. Amazing. This speaks to the depth of the creative talent in Nova Scotia and to Tom Fitzgerald's commitment to this place. After very rough years in the film industry, during which the province has continued to spend about as much on supporting the industry as it did on the film tax credit, but with dramatically less employment generated, Splinters is a triumph. I cannot wait to take my seat in a full theatre, or in this case, the Rebecca Cohen. Congratulations to Tom Fitzgerald, cast and crew, and to the Atlantic Film Festival. Thank you.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Abby Lewis, a grade 6 student in Beaverbank. At age 11 years old, she was the first female in the 19 and under age group to cross the finish line in the Life Mark 5K race last May in Scotiabank Blue Nose Marathon. Her finishing time was 18 minutes and 45 seconds. Abby loves to run and it makes her happy, and she's not just a runner. She's a member of the Chebucto Athletic Association, does CrossFit in Halifax, competes in triathlons, and swims with the Sackville Aquatic Club. I'd ask the legislature and members of the government to congratulate Abby, and I'm wishing her the best of luck in her athletic career. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate a good friend of mine, Tracy Hilliard of Albert Bridge, on her recent book launch. Her book is entitled Through Rainbows and Storm Clouds, Finding His Place in the World. The book chronicles the Hilliards' journey following the autism diagnosis of their oldest son, Matthew. Matthew is now 21 years old, and he has a 10-year-old younger brother, Marcus. The 200-page book explores the world of autism and how Tracy and her husband, Mike, dealt with the obstacles and rewards they encountered along the way. Tracy, a tireless volunteer and vocal advocate for quality education, also encourages educators to read her book. It is a true honor to congratulate Tracy on the release of her book, and I wish her well on her mission to help other families who are dealing with their diagnosis. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, as my colleague from Halifax Needham has already said, this evening the red carpet will roll out for the opening of the Finn International Film Festival, and I want to take a moment to recognize all the local filmmakers, actors, crew members, producers, and other industry professionals who, against all odds, have contributed to this year's fine selection of films. I also want to acknowledge those who would like to be working in our film industry but who have had to leave the industry or the province since the Liberal government cut the film tax credit. But tonight is a night for celebration, and so I want to acknowledge some of the people from Dartmouth North who will be featured in films this year. Shelley Thompson co-stars in this year's opening gala film, Tom Fitzgerald's Splinters. Hopeless Romantic is a film created by a group of female filmmakers, including Megan Wenberg, who is a co-writer and director, and Genevieve Steele, Keegan Blue, and Katie Dorian all have roles in that. Musician and actor T. Thomason has a lead role in J. Doll's Halloween Party, and his mom, the aforementioned Shelley Thompson, also has a role. Mr. Speaker, Dartmouth North is home to many people involved in the film industry, and so I know I'm missing people, but I want to ask the House to join me in congratulating everyone involved in this year's festival and wish them a wonderful 8 days of watching, networking, and learning. Thank you.
The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Mr. Speaker, in July, 24 teams joined together at the Amir Oval for the 2018 Motion Ball Marathon of Sport in support of Special Olympics. Excuse me. With the support of participants and sponsors, more than $68,000 was raised. The day was fun-filled with participants teaming up with local special athletes where they competed in a variety of sports and activities. Mr. Speaker, 70% of the proceeds from this event go to Special Olympics Nova Scotia to support programs for local athletes. And 5% goes to the No Good Way campaign aimed at eliminating the R word from everyday conversation. I've had the honour of participating in Motion Ball for the past 5 years, and I'm proud to be involved in this worthwhile cause. I'd ask all members of the House to join me in congratulating all the participants and thank the volunteers of the 2018 Motion Ball Marathon of Sport and wish them all the best in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today is Stand Up Against Bullying Day, an original Nova Scotia idea since 2007. Today, Nova Scotians wear pink to highlight awareness of the issue and its primary message, to eradicate bullying and raise awareness of the crippling effects it can have on victims and society as a whole. The subject of bullying is near and dear to my heart. I have witnessed firsthand the emotional and psychological toll it inflicts not only on the victim, but also their family and often community. I challenge all members of this House to join with me in condemning bullying of any kind and endeavour to raise awareness of this issue whenever opportunity arises. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Mr. Speaker, Gus Cameron is a local Spryfielder who also served our country proudly for 26 years in the Royal Canadian Navy. Now retired, Gus stays busy working with and advocating on behalf of veterans. When the federal government canceled the Veterans NDI 75 card, as you would imagine, Gus and countless veterans across this country took it personally. Gus started up a petition, organized veterans, reached out to politicians of all stripes, and marched on Parliament. Well, Mr. Speaker, it was announced on September 11th that the federal government will reintroduce a veterans card that will identify and honour our veterans. A huge thank you to Gus for never giving up and fighting for our veterans. And a special thank you to his MP, Andy Fillmore, for working side by side with Gus to make this a reality. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Sydney Mines native, Dr. Susie Curry, who just became the new Dean of Prayer and Applied Sciences at Acadia University. Dr. Curry will also be a professor in the school's biology department. Dr. Curry spent 18 years at Mount Allison University in Sackville, where she taught in the biology department. She has a long list of university administrative and leadership roles at which she has excelled. I'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate Dr. Curry on her new position and on her remarkable career. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South on an introduction.
I'd like to draw the members' attention to the West Gallery, where my husband has graced us with his presence today. I just wanted to note, much to his chagrin, I'm sure, that my husband doesn't make it to the gallery because he's an awesome dad, hanging out with my 3 kids and working hard as an artist and arts administrator. So I'd like to ask you to join me in welcoming him to the house.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remember Bob Flynn, a resident of Chester and a fine gentleman. Bob passed away quietly at home on September 8, 2018 at the age of 90. Born in Halifax, the son of Frank and Gladys Flynn, Bob graduated from St. Patrick's High School, then earned a Bachelor of Science from St. Mary's University. He earned his degree in civil engineering from the Technical University of Nova Scotia, followed by a Master in Architecture from McGill University. After some Canadian adventures, including a stint on Baffin Island, he returned to Halifax to launch the Robert J. Flynn Design Group. At this time, he also began an enduring relationship with the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, acting as the chair of the board for the Atlantic region. Bob's interests were eclectic. He was a lifelong sailor, rower, skier, golfer, fly fisherman, and a beekeeper. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in offering our condolences to Bob's wife, Betty Flynn, and to his children, grandchildren, and large extended family. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, as the 2017-2018 academic year came to a close, the Nova Scotia International Student Program celebrated its 20th anniversary of hosting students in our province. During these 20 years, over 15,000 international students have been hosted in Nova Scotia. On average, an international student contributes $25,800 to the local economy, and in 2017-2018 alone, more than $28 million was contributed to this province by international students. In September, the Strait Regional Centre for Education in Cape Breton-Richmond is expecting 105 students and chaperones from 17 different countries around the world, with more to come for the second semester. Students are welcomed and live with host families while completing their studies in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to host families and program organizers for providing this opportunity which benefits students, families, and the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Steve Foran of Clareland for his ongoing involvement in the Big Brothers Big Sisters in-school mentor program. Every week for the past 5 years, Steve dedicates 1 hour meeting with his current mentee. The meetings involved eating lunch, playing board games, playing sports, and hanging out. Steve considers himself to be a very lucky person, to have grown up in a family with siblings and parents, and believes in giving back to those who may be less fortunate. Steve proclaimed that the meetings have had a vast impact on his own life, and he now considers his mentee part of the family. Steve encourages others to get involved in the Big Brother, Big Sisters Mentors program, stating that the 1-hour meeting could be the most important hour of the week for a child who is just a little less lucky. Mr. Speaker, I ask that you and members of this House of Assembly join me in thanking Steve for his time and dedication to the Big Brothers and Big Sisters in-school mentor program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure today to recognize the families of Corey Bates and Nick Merrill. For the last 12 years, they have organized a slow pitch tournament in Amherst that have raised over $50,000 for youth sports and charitable organizations. The two young men died tragically in a car accident in 2007. There is no doubt they would be proud of the work done in their memory. It has brought the community together, and the families have been able to give back through their tragedy. Mr. Speaker, I am humbled to thank the families of Corey and Nick for their selflessness and their ongoing support and commitment to the community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Wolfville author Jan Coates on the release of 2 new books, Talking to the Moon and a Halifax time-traveling tune. Talking to the Moon is a story about an 11-year-old girl who arrives in Lunenburg looking for her birth mother and her roots. A Halifax time-traveling tune is the story of a child who falls asleep and is whisked away to the 1950s Halifax by a magical tune. Jan has written over 20 stories for children, all based in Nova Scotia, telling Nova Scotian stories. She has twice been shortlisted to the Atlantic Writers Competition and a finalist for the Governor General's Literary Award for Children's Text. I would like the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Jan Coates on the publication of these 2 books and look forward to many more Nova Scotia stories from Jan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to commend and honour Bernice Fraser of Spring Hill. Bernice participated in her first Terry Fox run in 1992 when her employer vowed to match all funds raised that year. Bernice will never forget when Terry Fox came to Spring Hill. She has carried the torch ever since. Through pledges and bake sales, Bernice has raised more than $50,000 for the Terry Fox Foundation. With Oxford Frozen Foods matching every cent, Bernice is responsible for more than $100,000 for this great charity. Each year, Bernice walks 6.1 kilometers for the Terry Fox Run with her daughter, Sandra. Sadly, Sandra passed away from cancer. Bernice promised Sandra she would not give up the fight, and she has kept that promise. Mr. Speaker, I commend Bernice Fraser for her dedication and perseverance and thank her for a continued fight for this great cause. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to commend the Friends of Caribou Island. Local residents of Caribou Island took a keen interest in the preservation of the historic Caribou Island Lighthouse. This lighthouse stands as a landmark for tourists entering Nova Scotia from the Northumberland ferries and a working beacon for ocean traffic and the ferry service, which makes a number of crossings a day. Over time, the lighthouse became worn down. The residents took it upon themselves to contact the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans to offer their services in painting and ground maintenance in order to showcase the icon of Nova Scotia. Through their dedication and perseverance, the past spring, the lighthouse receives so much. Through their dedication, this past spring, the lighthouse received some much needed renovations. On behalf of Pictou West and Nova Scotia, I wish to thank the Friends of Caribou Island for their commitment and to know that if we all work together, anything is achievable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Yarmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Nova Scotia under-17 provincial boys basketball team competed and won gold this summer at the National Championships in Kamloops, British Columbia. Yarmouth's Dylan Landry was a member of that team. Dylan is a grade 12 student at Yarmouth Consolidated Memorial High, and as a member of the Nova Scotia Under-17 team, he competed in games and tournaments throughout the Maritimes, Quebec, and Springfield, Massachusetts, culminating in the team's trip to the Nationals in BC. I'd like to congratulate Yarmouth's Dylan Landry and the Nova Scotia Under-17 Provincial Boys Basketball team and wish him continued success in the sport of basketball and all the best for what I'm sure will be a very bright future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Andre O'Coin, a bright and passionate student who is a model participant of the Duke of Edinburgh program. Andre graduated from École du Carrefour in 2018, but while in school, he was interested in this program. When he realized that the program was not offered at his school, he took it upon himself to create a group. Andre is a Gold Award achiever of the Duke of Edinburgh program, and in 2018, he was one of 5 Canadians to represent the program at the Canada Service Corps Summit. Mr. Speaker, I ask all MLAs to join me in commending Andre for his determination and initiative to creating a Duke of Edinburgh program at his school. Thank you.
The honourable member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Ridgewood is an assisted living home in the town of Bridgewater, which has almost 50 residents. According to the facility's recreation and leisure coordinator, Kate Foster Krause, Ridgewood has an amazing core group of 6 dedicated volunteers who truly exemplify the facility's core values of love, respect, independence, and equality. Mabel Beaver, Marianne Durick, Karen Corkum, Doug Greger, Valerie Noss, and Karen Weil are kind, compassionate volunteers. Residents know their friendly faces, appreciate their warm hugs, and enjoy a comfortable rapport with them. They laugh and joke with the residents, but also provide comfort and a calming influence. At times, these volunteers experience a heart-wrenching loss of a resident, a friend, but they continue to put their hearts out there. Mabel, Marianne, Karen, Doug, Valerie, and Karen take the time to really get to know the residents, including where they like to sit at the bingo hall and what card has their special lucky number. People in the community often comment on how Ridgewood feels like home, not a home, and Kat feels that the volunteers help to make it that way. Their presence is irreplaceable, their knowledge remarkable. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Mr. Speaker, for 43 years, the Johnny Miles running event weekend has offered something for everyone. One of the longest running annual events in Nova Scotia. It was started in 1975 by Dr. Johnny Miles Willison. If a person is interested in trying their first 5K or qualifying for the Boston Marathon, this is the weekend to do it. Race is carried out on a mainly flat, scenic loop course with many fans providing support and encouragement along the way, and the finish line experience runners will never forget. Hundreds of friendly and helpful volunteers go out of their way to make sure runners have an enjoyable and rewarding experience. Congratulations to Terry Curley, race director, and his army of volunteers for another fabulous job. Their efforts are the reason this weekend continues to be a great success. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to note the passing since our last session of an important leader in the Nova Scotia Indo-Canadian community. Yashwant Rai arrived in Canada in May of 1967. He first taught school for 3 years in Hebron, then later at Robert Borden Junior High and Cole Harbour High. In 1972, Mr. Rai, because that's what I always called him, Mr. Rai, helped to start the Hindu temple here in Halifax, which gave members of his faith a place to worship. In 1986, Mr. Rai retired from teaching, but he kept on educating. I can tell you that come election time, we'd visit Mr. Rai and he would bring members of his community together to ask us tough questions, to grill us. In recent years, that event has been passed on to another, but we always knew we wanted Mr. Rai on our side. He was a lovely man full of gratitude to his fellow teachers, to the Hindu community, to his family for their support and affection. Mr. Rai passed away in July at the age of 90. His beloved wife, Sushila, and his son, Rajan, had predeceased him, but the rest of his family was with him in his final moments. Our thoughts go out to his children, Ashwani, Rama, Uma, and Anil and their families, and to his many friends. Mr. Rai will be sorely missed.
The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Anyone involved in education knows that not all students learn the same way. For students who require a different learning environment, programs like the Aerosmith program at Halifax Christian Academy can be the difference makers. I rise today to recognize Dartmouth East resident Kinza Allen, Aerosmith program director at Halifax Christian Academy. Kinza reached out to my office last winter to teach me about the Aerosmith program, and I was instantly intrigued. Aerosmith is a specialized program that works with students and adults that are diverse learners. It is a cognitive strengthening program that is based on the principles of neuroplasticity. Simply put, instead of giving students who struggle compensations to get their work done, this program uses exercises to strengthen their cognitive skills. The greatest program in the world would be nothing without great educators to implement it. So I rise today to commend Kinza Allen for her work with this amazing program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Charlene Thomas grew up in Dominion, Cape Breton, and now lives in North River, Colchester North. She is a past president of the Colchester East Hants branch of the Canadian Mental Health Association, has been involved in helpline and palliative care services, and is the owner of Complete Counseling Services. Charlene has been writing songs, stories, and poems since she was a young teen. She says she finds ways of this writing as an effective way of relieving stress. Her first book, Achieving Personal Power and Inner Calm, was published in 2014 and addresses the relationships between spiritual and mental health principles and practices. Her latest work and her first work of fiction is entitled Unconscious. It tells the story of a young woman who suffers a concussion which sends her back in time to the time she was 13. The book not only describes her journey back to herself, but challenges and invites the readers to make changes now. Mr. Speaker, I ask members of the House of Assembly to join me in wishing Charlene continued success with her new novel.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, excuse me. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge a special Cape Breton couple. Caitlin and Joel McQueen's wedding last month turned into an impromptu fundraiser for the Cape Breton Regional Hospital's Pediatrics TLC Fund in honour of their niece Molly. Molly was unable to take part in the wedding due to her medical conditions. The wedding raised $6,000 for the fund that Molly has benefited from in the past. Joel and Caitlin are back in Calgary, but they hope that others may be inspired to take similar action to raise funds for the Regional Hospital Foundation. It is a special honour to thank and congratulate Caitlin and Joel McQueen for their generosity and to wish them a long and happy marriage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Craig Burgess on his induction into the Berwick Sports Hall of Fame. Originally from Truro, Craig was raised in a family of curlers. A natural athlete, Craig won provincial championships in track and field competition and excelled at the sport of curling, where he won provincial and national championships and the World Juniors in 1998. As the MLA for Kings West, I would like to offer my sincere congratulations to Craig Burgess on his induction into the Berwick Sports Hall of Fame and thank him for his dedication to the sports community in Nova Scotia. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the tremendous achievement of a man who was diagnosed with MS in his early 20s. When he was 41, Richard Dory moved into Queen's Manor in Liverpool, and at the age of 52, he's the youngest resident in this long-term care facility. Over the past 10 years, instead of giving up on life, he has passed the time by writing his autobiography, recording memories of his early life in southwest Port Mattoon and since his diagnosis. Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate Richard Dory, who, despite numerous physical challenges, finally had his book officially released on July 11, 2018. His positive attitude to life truly is an inspiration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This summer, Antigonish had the privilege of hosting the 2018 Special Olympics Canada Summer Games. The opening ceremonies were held on July 31st, and Mr. Speaker, it was an incredible and inspiring event. It was a sold-out crowd with tickets in high demand. Athletes from across the country entered the venue behind their provincial flag bearer to enormous rounds of applause. Team Nova Scotia was led by Anakinish's own Ryan Kearney. Ryan, who has been involved with Special Olympics since he was a little boy, was the perfect candidate to be selected as the flag bearer for Team Nova Scotia. His sportsmanship and personality makes him a great ambassador for Special Olympics and indeed all of Nova Scotia. Ryan is an avid golfer and was competing in golf on his home course, the Antigonish Golf and Country Club, in pursuit of his second National Special Olympics gold medal. While he didn't win gold, I have no doubt Ryan made many new friends and memories, including the moment he led his teammates into the opening ceremonies. It was a moment I'm sure he will never forget, because I know I won't.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the newly opened 511 Youth and Family Centre in North Sydney. The North Sydney Kiwanis Club, along with the Canadian Tire Store, contributed a full complement of floor hockey equipment to the centre. Thanks to community support, this organisation, it will make a positive impact on the north side. Plans are in the works for a full audio studio, robotics, soldering, crafting, visual arts, cinematography, and photography. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish the 511 Centre every success as they build our community, and to thank everyone who's contributed to this important centre. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Preston Dartmouth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize St. Anne's Church of Lake Echo on the occasion of their 50th year anniversary celebrated on October 14, 2018. Archbishop Anthony Monsini will be participated in the church service and anniversary celebrations. The reception of the anniversary celebrations will be held at the Porters Lake Community Centre for both current and former members of the congregation. I applaud and congratulate St. Anne's Church on their 50th anniversary and wish them continued success in the future of their active involvement in our communities.
The honourable member for Cape Breton-Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, May 26, members of the Loosedale Lions Club and guests from other community organizations and businesses gathered to celebrate their 49th annual Charter Night. During the evening, the service and commitment of Lions members to community was recognized. Awards and certificates were handed out to Lions members, community organizations, and businesses for their contributions and efforts to making their community a better place to live. A Medal of Merit was presented to Charter member Don Cornell for his 49-plus years of service to the community. Special awards were presented to 3 outstanding community builders, Evelyn Landry, Jean-Marie Landry, and Hubert Kraitzak. Mr. Speaker, I would like to offer a sincere thank you and congratulations to the Loosedale Lions Club and all Lions Clubs across Nova Scotia for their contributions to improving their communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if you're traveling along Route 14 in Upper Rawdon, your eye will be drawn to a building that might make you think you've driven back in time. The McPhee's Country Store Museum opened its quaint doors 2 years ago thanks to Marvin and Elfrida McPhee and their passion for memorabilia from days gone by. 28 years ago, they began collecting classic tin cans that you would have seen in your grandmother's pantry. They expanded their collection to pretty much everything that you would find in an old general store. And when their basement was full, they built a museum. Stepping inside makes you feel like you really have time traveled. Their efforts and love of bygone days is obvious and has delighted many visitors who are drawn to the whimsical appearance of the museum. Visitors experience a sense of nostalgia that keeps them lingering in wonder at things that they haven't seen in decades, like the Sears Wish Book. It is a treasure in our community, and I'd like to offer appreciation to Marvin and Elfrida McPhee for their wonderful museum that offers visitors a trip down memory lane. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
Mr. Speaker, I want to acknowledge the enormous impact the many groups volunteering to clean up our beaches have had on these sites. These initiatives, which are provided gloves and bags by the Great Nova Scotia Pick-Me-Up, ensure that our beaches will look their best for locals and visitors. The Culloden Wharf Beach Up Cleanup volunteers include Mrs. Amiro's Options and Opportunity class, a class that participated in a few cleanups during the summer months. There was also a cleanup of the beach in Sandy Cove and in Gulliver's Cove in early June. The second organized by the Gulliver's Cove Trails Association. The cleanups continued over the months of June and July on the Acacia Valley Trails, as well as in Pond Cove on Briar Island, Marshalltown, and others. The lifeguards at Mavalette Beach even organized one at their beach after the summer beach season ended. Nova Scotians care deeply about their beaches and public areas and that they are clean. In 2017, 9,600 people participated in 207 cleanups, filling over 11,400 garbage bags and 1,300 blue bags. I thank them all for their efforts, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, I stand today to recognize Birkenshaw's Tea Room in Amherst. The business is run by Adrian and Eleanor Bradbury. They opened in Amherst in the last year and have already been recognized as one of the top 10 places in Canada to have afternoon tea. With Amherst being the entrance to Nova Scotia, having a new tea room receive national recognition will boost local tourism industry. Mr. Speaker, it is a true pleasure to have Adrian and Eleanor be part of the Amherst business community and help promote what our province has to offer. I ask all members to join me in congratulating Adrian and Eleanor on receiving this national recognition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Citadel Sable Island.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the Prismatic Arts Festival taking place now until September 16th. Prismatics is an arts festival that showcases the work of Canada's leading Indigenous artists. Now in its 10th year, the events vary from performing arts to media and literary. The festival also includes workshops, a national conference, and accessible performances. Prismatics is taking place across multiple venues in Metro Halifax, and I encourage people to check it out. I'd also like to congratulate festival organizer on a decade of hard work and innovation with this festival. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions for the Premier. This past May, the Auditor General appeared before the Public Accounts Committee to discuss the Maintenance Enforcement Program. This program acts as a critical go-between for maintenance recipients and payers. The program, according to the Auditor General, services 15,000 cases. Captured, though, in those cases are 13,000 children. The Auditor General found at the time of his audit there were $63 million in uncollected maintenance payments. Does the Premier know if any progress has been made in ensuring that these recipients get the payments they are entitled to and what the outstanding balance is as of today?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. I want to assure her most recent budget we've increased the support that we'll be working in maintenance and enforcement to ensure that the money that is owing to children across this province is paid. We also worked with the national government to ensure the new justice bill included a component of that justice bill was that if a divorce happens, goes through the court, and that we believed if there was a child maintenance as part of that all of the important information that were required, if someone wasn't paying that maintenance, would be submitted to the court so that the custodial parent wouldn't have to continually going back to the justice system to have orders enforced. And I want to be very clear, Mr. Speaker, this money is owed to children across this province, and if the court orders you to pay it, we expect you to pay it.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
I'd like to thank the Premier for his answer. Obviously, recipients rely on these payments for day-to-day expenses just like us. When these payments are delayed or never collected, there are real consequences, including Nova Scotians who end up on social assistance, unfortunately. According to the Auditor General's findings, workers in maintenance enforcement face caseloads as high as 450 files each. No wonder so much money goes uncollected. So does the Premier believe that his government is dedicating sufficient resources to managing the maintenance enforcement program?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, and again I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we've made additional investments into that program since the information the Auditor General is referring to.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
There are many more questions raised by the Auditor General. His report deserves greater examination, and the department should answer for these findings. The Public Accounts Committee shut down 3 weeks early this summer. Our caucus asked that those 3 weeks be filled with the issues raised in the Auditor General's report. But the government used their majority on the Public Accounts Committee to block the witnesses and avoid the topics, and everyone start their vacation early. So I'd like to know, why should Nova Scotians trust that they will ever get any answers when this government directs its members to shut down Public Accounts Committee early?
The Honourable Premier.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell her that this government in public accounts sits twice as much as the next province in the country, Mr. Speaker. We continue to sit more than any other Canadian province to scrutinize and be able to have the books open. The Auditor General is very clear. He comes in, he made recommendations around maintenance and enforcement, Mr. Speaker. We're implementing those recommendations. On top of that, we've made investments to hire more people in that branch, Mr. Speaker. But let me be very clear. This is not something that started in 2013. But we're the first government, Mr. Speaker, to actually make the investments to take this serious, because this money's owed to children. And if the court says you owe it, we expect you to pay it. And if you don't, we're going to do everything we can to ensure that you do.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
2 weeks ago today, over 24 community groups and environmental groups and businesses and trade unions met to issue the 2030 declaration, a declaration which calls on the government to adopt greenhouse gas emission reduction targets of 50% of 1990 levels by 2030. This would bring us in Nova Scotia in alignment with our country's national commitments on the Paris Agreement, and it would place us at the forefront of GHG reductions in the entire country. So I want to re-express to the Premier the question that was asked 2 weeks ago. Will he support the 2030 declaration and the reduction of 50% of 1990 by 2030?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable for the question. I want to reassure him that we are continuing to do the good work that was provided by former Minister of Environment from Kings North, a Minister of Environment who served under the Democratic Party, and a number who served in this party, to continue to make sure Nova Scotia is a leader in the country. Mr. Speaker, we're 30% below 2005 levels now. We'll be on target to be near 50% in 2030. We're continuing to make adjustments. We're not saying that's good enough. We're going to continue to make improvements, whether it's home adaptation programs, ensuring that we continue to make sure and reduce our individual carbon footprint, Mr. Speaker, so that we are and continue to be the leader in Canada.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Nothing about what the Premier has said changes the fact, however, and this is one of the great concerns of the signatories of the 2030 declaration, that we have stagnated on this, and in fact are not moving forwards but are moving backwards in our commitments to climate change. So we have the 2020 targets because these were part of the all-party process the Premier has spoken about of the environmental goals and sustainable prosperity legislation. But that legislation was to have been reviewed and renewed in 2017. It hasn't been, and that leaves us today in the situation in Nova Scotia where we have no 2030 targets whatsoever. So I want to ask the Premier, why won't he commit to reaching the 2030 declaration level, the 50% reduction of 1990 by 2030, as a part of the renewing and the reviewing of the EGSPA legislation?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There was two components to that piece of legislation. One was continue to make sure that we continue to reduce our greenhouse gas production, Mr. Speaker. Nova Scotians should be proud of the work they've been doing. We're leading the country. We'll be well on target for our 2030 targets, Mr. Speaker. The other component of that, Mr. Speaker, was economic growth. We're continuing to make sure that we protect the environment. At the same time, our economy is growing, Mr. Speaker. We're making investments. More young people are choosing to stay in this province. We buck the trend that's happening outside. We see our population growing. We're seeing investments in the private sector, Mr. Speaker. We're doing both, Mr. Speaker. We're protecting the environment and growing the economy.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
This is exactly the point, growing the economy and economic growth. We know that today in Canada there are more people working in renewable energy and in energy efficiency than in all of oil and gas and mining and working in the woods put together. And we know that we have the evidence to show from the Green Economy Network that if we adopted the 2030 declaration, we'd be able in Nova Scotia to create 30,000 person years of work in the areas of sustainable transportation and renewable energy and in energy efficiency. So I want to ask the Premier, is he not concerned that by failing to adopt the 50% below 1990 by 2030 target, we are in fact missing out on one of the real economic opportunities of our generation?
The Honourable Premier.
No, Mr. Speaker. I believe we can do both, Mr. Speaker. We're continuing to ensure that we provide those who are working in our economy today stability, that the jobs will be there for them tomorrow. At the same time, making investments in future opportunities, Mr. Speaker, while we're protecting the environment. Many people throw out all of these stats, Mr. Speaker, veering right or left. The fact of the matter is this is a balanced approach. We've continued to make sure that this province leads the country. Every political party in this House should be proud of the work they've started. It's under the former member from Kings North who started this down the road. All parties supported it through successive elections. When Nova Scotians have changed governments, we've continued down the path to ensuring that we stayed on target to reduce greenhouse gases. The difference, Mr. Speaker, is our party believes as we do that, we should provide economic opportunity for young Nova Scotians, and we're seeing just that. A balanced approach, Mr. Speaker, is providing good opportunities and at the same time protecting the environment.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. My question's for the Premier. In previous sessions, my colleagues and I have asked the Premier to commit to building a walk-in clinic for veterans. A walk-in clinic that understands the needs of our veterans and is set up specifically for them, Mr. Speaker. It is an idea that is supported by the All-Party Veterans Affairs Committee, and the Premier has, on multiple occasions, expressed his support for the idea. He has said, however, that he believes that it is the responsibility of the federal government to provide such a clinic. Since the last sitting, has the Premier had the opportunity to raise this important issue with the Prime Minister or others in the federal government, and has there been a positive response?
The Honourable Premier.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have had the opportunity to raise this issue with the national government. She would also know there is a facility in this city that is providing those services now that are being received by some veterans, Mr. Speaker. What we're looking at, what is the best avenue to make sure that we can provide a broader scope of services to those requiring the PTSD support, and we look forward to that coming to a successful conclusion.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
In recent weeks, we have learned that Veterans Affairs Canada had agreed to pay for the PTSD treatment for Christopher Garney. Christopher, as you may recall, developed PTSD after killing an off-duty police officer and disposing her body in a compost bin. Christopher Garney himself has not served our country, but receives the funding as a family member of a veteran. The Premier has already voiced his opposition to this funding, and he did so immediately and directly to the Minister of Veterans Affairs, and I do commend him for doing that. But I do want to ask the Premier, in his conversations with the Minister of Veterans Affairs, did he ask that any new money that was coming here to Nova Scotia should go towards a veterans walk-in clinic, and unfortunately not to a convicted police killer?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, what I have spoken to the Minister about is what is the best way for the national government to pay for a service inside of our province, whether it is the new clinic or whether it is not support a clinic that is currently working, that is providing services not to enough veterans. What she's referring to, Mr. Speaker, when I spoke to the Minister around this very issue about Mr. Garnier receiving support, we need to be very careful in the fact that family members of people who serve our country receive PTSD from the fact of the service of their parent. And that's exactly what this was for. I believe somebody made the mistake, and I've made it very clear that I do not believe we should be paying for PTSD services for Mr. Garnier in our justice system. Their justice system will deal with them. The services and supports that are there for all of those incarcerated should be provided to him. But the money that is inside of Veterans Affairs to cover services for veterans and their families should go directly to those who are impacted by the service of the loved one.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth North.
Minister of Education. For the past 2 weeks, I've been hearing from parents in Dartmouth North who are frustrated with the chaos and confusion around busing to and from our schools. Our amazing teachers and principals have gone above and beyond to support our children through this completely unacceptable situation. The minister has now promised a review, but he should never have allowed this situation to happen in the first place. Mr. Speaker, can the minister please explain why he didn't ensure that there was a plan for busing before school started in September?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker. We know that a number of parents had some significant concerns related to bus timing. We've asked and directed the region to fix those immediate challenges. So we're at about 98% of our buses getting to and from school on time. The amount of negative feedback coming into the region is slowing, and MLAs are getting some positive feedback that their parents' case files are being dealt with in a timely manner. So that shows me that there's been improvements made. But we are now able to take a look holistically, province-wide, on busing policies and practices to make sure that we're doing our very best from one end of the province to the next.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, I have not yet received positive feedback from any parents. In fact, the calls to my office are ramping up with more complaints. Yesterday, I spoke with a group of parents who were waiting with their children for the bus. That particular bus was 10 minutes late yesterday, but the route is actually scheduled to arrive at the school 5 minutes after the bell. The children on this route are automatically put at a disadvantage. They're rushing to get started in the morning. They're not able to play with their friends when they arrive. And when the bus is late, as it was yesterday, or in the winter when they have to deal with snowsuits or whatever, it will get worse. So, Mr. Speaker, does the minister really think it is acceptable that a school bus is scheduled so that these children are late for school every day?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I think every parent and student in this province has a right to expect on-time, safe, reliable, efficient busing service. And we are committed to improving the service to better meet the needs of our students and communities. The governance changes that we've made in the system will allow us to actually have a provincial view on this, to play a direct and active role on it. And that's why we are taking action on these issues so that parents can expect better in the future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, ambulance wait at the emergency department to offload patients because of overcrowding in the emergency departments. According to the NSGEO Code Critical Report, one nurse reported times where there were 14 ambulances backed up while paramedics waited with patients. When ambulances are waiting to offload patients at the emergency departments, ambulance coverage around the HRM suffers, which can affect other areas of the province. So my question to the Minister is, what is the plan to address the issue of ambulance gridlock across Nova Scotia emergency departments?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for bringing this question to the floor of the legislature. I'm pleased to advise him, all members of the legislature, of the great work that's been done under the leadership at Dartmouth General Hospital Emergency Department, along with our partners at the EHS system. This was an initiative that they started about 10 months ago, Mr. Speaker, that changed the way that they offload ambulances at that hospital. They've seen very good success in improving the offload times. And Mr. Speaker, there's work ongoing with the NSHA and our partners, the EHS, to look at ways to validate the results that they've been seeing on the ground and move it out to other sites.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the situation has gotten so bad that the union representing Nova Scotia paramedics has been tweeting for 5 months using hashtag CodeCritical to raise awareness about ambulance availability. There's been reports in some instances within a province where there has taken up to 2 hours for an ambulance to arrive at the scene. The ambulance system is in disarray and paramedics are asking for the Minister's help because their members are getting fatigued. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, why have you not answered the union who represents Nova Scotia paramedics when they call for a summit with other healthcare partners so Nova Scotians can receive the service they deserve?
Just like to remind the honourable member to keep his questions directed through the chair, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to report to my colleagues through you, Mr. Chair, that in fact I've met with frontline healthcare workers, including paramedics. I believe it was the member of the NDP that suggested perhaps I'd go out and do a tour with some paramedics. I did that this spring, where I was able to go out and see paramedics firsthand in hospitals waiting, Mr. Speaker, with offload. I had that opportunity both at the Halifax Infirmary and Dartmouth General, as well as other paramedics, Mr. Speaker. I've spoken to unions. I've gotten the feedback and the information, as I've mentioned in my first response. Work is underway to address these issues.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my question through you is for the Minister of TIR. Mr. Speaker, in what may be the least shocking report ever released, Statistics Canada has said that the roads in Nova Scotia are in terrible shape. The data was collected from 1,500 government organizations across Canada, and the numbers are as jarring as the potholes are here in Nova Scotia. 49% of Nova Scotia's highways are rated as poor or very poor. The Canadian average is 17.1%. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that again. The Canadian average is 17.1%, and in Nova Scotia, it is almost triple that figure. So my question to the minister is, will the Minister of Transportation please explain how it came to be that half of our highways would be rated so poorly?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I want to publicly thank the over 2,200 people who are employed by our department who are working hard to preserve the safety of the roads in Nova Scotia, not counting the thousands of people, Nova Scotians, who are employed by the contractors who go out daily to fix and repair these roads, Mr. Speaker. Safety is our top priority in the department. We have 23,000 kilometres of roads. Because we are such an old province, and because our roads have evolved with us as we've been populated over the last 400 years, we have special challenges to preserve that network for all our citizens in every part of our province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the minister is right. The men and women who do work on our highways are fantastic individuals. But they can only do, Mr. Speaker, with what they've been given, and they haven't been given enough to do the work they need to do. Mr. Speaker, the way that this government operates, tomorrow we'll probably read a press release congratulating the government for making the repair industry in the auto section a success because of all the bad accidents they've had on these poor roads. I'll go back to the report, Mr. Speaker, from Statistics Canada. 49% of the highways, 43% of the arteries, and 39% of the collector roads are rated as poor or very poor. The odds of driving on a safe road shouldn't be the same as the odds of a coin flip. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why Nova Scotians should trust that there is any chance of our highways improving?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question, particularly his comment about the commitment of this government to our budget. $285 million in capital projects this year, up $60 million, the third highest budget in the history, the proud history of this province, Mr. Speaker. $60 million dedicated to the improving the safety of our highways, to our twinning program, the improvement of our bridges, which continues every day. And we are very proud of our road system in Nova Scotia and the commitment of this government to improve it, make it safe, and make it better for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think all members of this House appreciate how vital AEDs, or automatic external defibrillators, are to saving lives. These machines are portable, battery operated, and almost anyone can use them. Statistics show that most AEDs that you see will never be used. But the problem comes when an AED is needed and cannot be seen. We all know about the tragic death of Michael Foley. A life-saving AED was only 700 meters from where he collapsed. By some estimates, there are more than 1,000 AEDs in our province, but only about half of them are on the provincial registry. So my question to the Minister of Health, can the Minister update the House on what action he is taking to make sure the registry is accurate?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and the member's right. We did implement a registry last year to track the AED systems within our province. I encourage all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, if they're aware of an AED in their community, to either contact or advise the owners of the AED of the registry so that they can encourage them to contact. Mr. Speaker, it's something I do. It's something that I encourage others to do. Every member of this legislature can do that within their own communities. Let the people know that this registry now exists. It wouldn't have necessarily been there when they purchased their AEDs. The other thing, Mr. Speaker, that's important is work is ongoing to integrate with the 911 system so that we can provide that integration and deliver the information. But that takes computer system upgrades, Mr. Speaker. That work, too, is ongoing.
The honourable member for Victoria-the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, Mr. Speaker, even if the registry was up to date, EHS dispatch is not able to tell callers the location of the nearest AED. And I'll table a global story to that effect. I know there are plans to fully integrate the system to include telling callers the location. If that integration hasn't happened, it's vital that it be done immediately. If it has happened, it hasn't been well communicated. It's a simple step that, without a question, will save lives. So can the minister tell the House when the registry will be integrated with the EHS and commit to a public education program?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I do thank the member for bringing this topic to the floor of the legislature. It is a great opportunity to bring awareness to all of the members here. I encourage all members to go back to their communities and spread the word as well. We have encouraged and have taken steps to let people know about the registry. Again, it's being administered online that people can register, I believe, as well. The work, though, Mr. Speaker, for us to do the integration is ongoing. I don't have a date for when that integration will be done, but we'll be sure to let all Nova Scotians know.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. In 2014, the Nova Scotia School Board Association asked the department to review the rules around school busing and provide adequate funding for transportation of students to and from school. In 2017, the same request came from the Halifax Regional School Board. And now, with no school boards, after 2 weeks of stories of students being stranded and families scrambling to fill the gaps, the minister has finally said he will conduct a review, and we look forward to seeing the results of that review. But, Mr. Speaker, why has the minister dragged his feet for years on finding a solution to this problem?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We've had an ambitious agenda for transformation in our education system. We've made significant changes in the governance of our system, the administration of our system. The issues that people have told us in this chamber and in our communities that were most urgent were behavioral supports for our system. That was the focus of our first year in office, bringing in a new pre-primary program so that every single 4-year-old in this province has access to critical early learning, expanding our child care sector, Mr. Speaker. It's funny, every time we've moved quickly and ambitiously on these projects, the opposition parties have told us to slow down, that we're being reckless. The fact is that we can't do everything at one time. We had a plan this year to review busing, to review funding formulas and guidance counselor ratios, and that work is going to be ongoing for this year, and I expect to have improvements in every single one of those areas.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, the School Board Association submitted this request 4 years ago, long before the litany of changes that were just rattled off were ever even conceived. Mr. Speaker, Wayne McKay, a Dalhousie University law professor who's authored books on laws governing Canadian education, was recently quoted as saying the busing issue could easily be resolved or more easily dealt with if we still had a school board structure. The removal of that level of representation and democracy comes at a certain price, and I'll table that. The department has said the review will look at policies and practices, but what about listening to parents? Mr. Speaker, will the minister explain how he will consult with students and parents, like the ones who have been flooding my office, as he tries to fix the situation around school busing?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I know that the members opposite have defended the status quo in our education system. They've defended the previous governance structure that 3 independent reports indicated was creating a situation where student achievement varied from region to region.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, that system that the members opposite defend resulted in a situation where, depending on where you went to school in this province, your chances of succeeding varied. 3 independent reports told us that governance and administration was a problem, Mr. Speaker. That's why we acted, because we think we need to do better for our students. And while the members opposite defend the special interest that we've taken on this journey, we will stand firmly behind the students and their success. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question for the Minister of Business. Many of my constituents and many Nova Scotians are anxiously awaiting improved rural internet service. I understand that the government has split the program into two parts. They have a trust, which will fund internet improvements, and they have a reconstituted company, I guess, which is going to oversee the deployment. I've heard that the cost across the province could be $300 to $500 million. I understand the initial seed funding in the trust in March was $120 million. Just wonder if the minister can clarify if that trust is still at $120 million, or if more money has been put into that trust, or maybe even any spent so far.
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. And of course, this is a program and a project and an initiative that we're very proud of on this side of the House. We're embarking on an unprecedented level of spending per capita within the Federation for broadband and internet connectivity for all of our citizens. The number now stands in the Internet Trust at $193 million. What the Internet Trust will do is it'll hold that money within the confines of its mandate, and Develop Nova Scotia will bring forward projects, initiatives on behalf of municipalities, communities, ISPs who are working with communities across the province, obviously in strategic areas that require satellite, wireless, or of course hardwired fiber optic cable known as the middle mile, and of course the last mile. So this is the work that's ongoing now. Develop Nova Scotia sets up these projects. The Internet Trust reviews them and makes a final decision. And again, the number at this point is $193 million.
The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for updating the House on that number of $193 million. Just wonder if the Minister can give us a bit of a timeline on when the actual deployments would actually start. So the money's there now, and now the process will actually start to unfold. So if the Minister can just give us some indication, I can tell the people in Pictou East that are waiting for improvements to the rural internet when they may expect to see some of those.
The Honourable Minister of Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again, thank the member for the question. And I did want to go back to something I missed in the first question. The number that Bright Star identified for Nova Scotia was at a maximum level, at a peak, would be $500 million. With what that 193 leverage with federal dollars, of course, and the private sector, which will play a role here. This initial investment by itself will get us a good ways along to 95% access and connectivity for all Nova Scotians that have been identified here. Because of the nature of this program and the fact that it is uncharted water for any province within the country, Develop Nova Scotia is building the foundation from the ground up. So how we're going to do it, how we're going to work with communities, what recommendations we're going to take forward is critical to get it right. They are doing that work now. They are doing consultations across the province. We certainly hope the money will be outflowing and flowing in a significant way by late fall. Yeah, thanks.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Health. My office can barely keep up with calls from constituents who are concerned about how this government is undermining health care at the Roseway Hospital. Time and time again, I've brought legitimate concerns to the floor of the legislature, only to be given the same old non-committal responses by this Minister of Health. Just a few days ago, I rose in this House to ask the Minister specifically about the future of Roseway Hospital. He has deferred, he has talked around the issue, and he's been vague. My question to the Minister is pretty simple. Will he give me his word today that for as long as he is the Minister responsible for health and wellness, the Roseway Hospital will remain an open, full-service hospital? A simple yes or no is all I'm looking for.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for bringing this question forward. As I've said before, Mr. Speaker, my mandate is quite clear to all Nova Scotians. My responsibility, Mr. Speaker, is to ensure that we assess and work with our partners to develop the appropriate care initiatives and services for primary care and acute care throughout the province. Mr. Speaker, we work with our frontline partners in healthcare to do that. We've seen investments and expansion in investments for physicians, for nurse practitioners, Mr. Speaker, to help with the primary care access across this province, Mr. Speaker. We've listened to frontline workers. We've made these investments, and we'll continue to do that.
The Honourable Member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we all know the Minister of Health's mandate. That's why I keep asking the questions. The Minister claims to work and make his decisions based upon the information that comes to his attention in the best interest of Nova Scotians. It's not in the best interest of my constituents that don't have a family doctor. It's not in the best interest of my constituents who have to travel 12 to 14 hours or sit 12 to 14 hours in an ER because theirs is not open. And it's not in the best interest of my constituents who have to have their lab work tested at another hospital. My question to the Minister is, will he leave his office tower in Halifax and join the current concerned residents in Shelburne County at the People Over Politics rally on September 22nd? Let's try this again, Mr. Speaker. A simple yes or no is all I'm looking for the constituents of Shelburne.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, for the member, when I was in Shelburne, met toward the Roseway facility, saw the start of the construction of the clinic that's being built there in the community to help with primary care access. Mr. Speaker, that work is ongoing. I was advised that they have more family physicians in that community than they'd had in decades,
Order, please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
That they have more family physicians in the community than they'd had in decades, Mr. Speaker, that the work that we can continue to invest in for communities like Shelburne and across the province, Mr. Speaker, will continue. We continue to work with our partners at the Nova Scotia Health Authority and communities across this province to demonstrate the attractive opportunities to provide primary care throughout this province.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Education. Last year, the official opposition called on the government to slow down and delay pre-primary by 1 year to ensure the program was properly and fairly implemented. As the minister knows, the rushed rollout of pre-primary has resulted in issues like access to playground equipment, as well as enrollment challenges. I have a constituent who wishes to enroll her child at Admiral Westfall Elementary, where there are only 4 enrolled in the pre-primary classes out of a possible 24. My colleague from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage has a similar situation. There is room for 20 more students, but the rules governing catchment areas are preventing this family from accessing pre-primary. Interesting, Mr. Speaker, the minister just indicated to this House every 4-year-old will have access to pre-primary. Is the minister prepared to follow common sense and allow flexibility within the rules governing pre-primary catchment areas? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member actually speaks to the biggest challenge we're actually having with the rollout of pre-primary, and that's keeping up with demand that we have in our communities, Mr. Speaker. There's been a number of these cases that have come forward where parents want their kids to access pre-primary outside of catchment. We do have to treat everybody equally. We do have to have some logic applied to the situation so that we can broaden this reach as far as possible. Mr. Speaker, we're looking at the out-of-catchment policy right now, and I hope to have some answers for the member and for all of those that are trying to access this program who want us to move more quickly with it by the end of the month.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the minister that the purpose of policy and procedure is to create a sense of fairness, to create a sense of equality of opportunity, not to defy common sense. Sometimes, Mr. Speaker, having common sense and flexibility from a situation like this is resulting in enormous frustration for my constituents. And because of a lack of consideration, families are missing out on an educational opportunity, and the pre-primary program at Admiral Westfall is nowhere near capacity. This government is excluding students because of poor planning, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister allow school principals and the regional education centres the same flexibility with pre-primary as they do from primary to grade 12? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the question. We are working on policy so that out-of-catchment cases and requests can be treated fairly and equally all across the province, Mr. Speaker. And we will do our very best to keep up with demand as Nova Scotians express it. But the irony that member now is challenging us on increasing the access to this program, a program that that party voted against, opposed. One of the leadership candidates said they would get rid of it if they were Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker. I hope it's not lost on this House or the member of that member's community.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture. Rising sea levels and more frequent storms are already impacting our wharves and coastal infrastructure. Last month, a warm water tiger shark was caught off our shores for the first time ever, and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is reporting that ocean temperatures in Atlantic Canada are 2 to 3 degrees higher than average. At the same time, fisheries to the south of us are predicting declining lobster stocks as temperatures rise even further. So my question for the minister is, what is he doing to make sure this government is addressing the risks that climate change poses to our fisheries?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Minister for her, member Ismeen, for her question. It's a serious concern for us, and the catches in the lobster industry in Maine have got smaller, and also there's more soft-shell lobsters. So it's something we're watching. We're looking at different areas for harvesting fish and different approaches. So as the time goes on, it's a slow process of climate change, and we're working with the industry to address it.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. Mr. Speaker, this summer the Cape Sharp tidal turbine spun for 6 weeks in the Minas Passage without fish kill monitoring equipment in place. It was in violation of its environmental assessment, but this government had no plan for bringing it back into compliance. For years, fishers have expressed concerns about the impact of tidal turbines, and this regulatory failure has done nothing to reassure them. Does the minister think this regulatory failure by the Department of Environment is acceptable?
The Honourable Minister of Fisheries.
I refer that to the Minister for Mines and Energy.
The Honourable Minister of Mines and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question. I would update the host that we've been working with the partners of the Cape Sharp turbine. We made it quite clear to them that they needed to get back into compliance, that they needed to work together to ensure that monitoring was put back in place. The staff is on the ground now. Partners are working together to monitor the turbine, and I'm confident in the process moving forward.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, many of the people who are in my constituency use the Glace Bay General as their ER area, and this summer the Premier and the Minister of Health came to CBRM to announce improvements to the ER in Glace Bay. Now, after that announcement, the emergency room in Glace Bay was closed over 350 hours from July 29th to August the 14th. That's 350 hours out of a possible 408. And that, Mr. Speaker, is one of the area hospitals that this government says is staying open. With this crisis in health care in this province, people in my area wonder where will they turn when an emergency arises. So the question for the minister through you is, will the minister please update the House when his plan for the future of health care in CBRM will be available so that the people of the area know where to turn in an emergency?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the member acknowledging the investments that we announced for the Cape Breton region, Mr. Speaker, including investments in Waterford, Northside, Cape Breton, in Sydney, and in Glace Bay, Mr. Speaker. With respect to the emergency room specifically, as I mentioned yesterday in my remarks during debate, Dr. Chris Milburn, who is an emergency room physician in Cape Breton, he acknowledged that these investments in modernizing and expanding ER departments in Sydney and Glace Bay will in fact have a positive effect on both recruitment and retention of physicians providing emergency room services, Mr. Speaker. That's what this investment is about, is actually the long-term care investment into the future of health care for the residents of Cape Breton.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, it's beyond me, Mr. Speaker, how anybody can say closing hospitals is an investment. A quick check of the Nova Scotia Health Authority shows the need of 3 full-time family physicians in Glace Bay and countless others throughout CBRM. Deliverables for these positions include running family practice office, clinics, providing call coverage, caring for inpatients at the Glace Bay General Hospital. Opportunity is available to work in the emergency room, provide obstetrical care, or assist in the OR. So the question to the minister is quite simple. Can the minister explain to the good people of the CBRM how only 3 people can possibly provide quality, timely care to patients when the demands on these positions are so great?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to recognize, of course, the great work of all of our primary health care professionals and professionals providing care to Nova Scotians throughout the health care system. Mr. Speaker, the positions that the member cited are available. We want to encourage them and communities. We know that communities like Cumberland, Mr. Speaker, down the Digby area are coming together to demonstrate the value. I know last year Cape Breton came together to launch a video to help promote the region, Mr. Speaker. I encourage the member to support those initiatives to highlight just how great it is to work in Cape Breton, just like other communities are doing across this province, because Nova Scotia is a great place to work for physicians. Our recruitment incentives are competitive, Mr. Speaker, and I encourage everyone to support the initiatives of the Nova Scotia Health Authorities. They recruit healthcare professionals to provide care to all Nova Scotians. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Transportation, Infrastructure and Renewal. In the lead up to a by-election, this government announced 2 major infrastructure projects for Cumberland South. On April 17th, it was reported that the province would replace a closed bridge over the Napan River. When he made the announcement, the minister said he expected construction to begin during this construction season to be completed in 2019. Yesterday, I received a letter from the minister saying the department expects to prepare a tender so that construction can begin 2019-20 construction season. I will table that letter. Will the minister explain what unforeseen issues are delaying the construction of this bridge a full year?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the member may be aware, the bridge in question was advanced considerably to meet the demands that are in the area there. And as a matter of fact, we did quite a bit of work to the abutments, so we would be in a good position to get the bridge constructed. The bridge process in the province involves making sure that we get good design, that we get safe design, and I can assure the member that that particular replacement is at the top of the list for us in terms of what we're going to do, and will be absolutely completed in the 2019 season.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland South.
I'm not sure what the unforeseen circumstances are yet, but Mr. Speaker, until the bridge is built, the residents are forced to take a detour around that route. The detour also diverts traffic onto a road that is not acceptable for this volume of traffic. This can only lead to a deterioration of yet more roads in this area. A substitute today's problem will be tomorrow's problem. Will the minister update the House on exactly when motorists in Cumberland County can expect to drive on a new Rainbow Bridge?
The Honourable Minister of Health. Minister of Transportation.
And I understand the inconvenience that that provides in the community, and we certainly apologize for that. However, our bridge replacement process means that we do it and we get it right. This is a significant structure. We want to make sure we have the right design in there to do that so that it will last for an additional 75 years, as long as the previous one did.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the summer, I received numerous complaints from constituents about an exorbitant amount of weeds and brush growing along the roadsides in Cape Breton Richmond, along the highways. It was so severe in some areas, actually, that 2 pedestrians were almost hit by vehicles. The brush and weeds are more than just an eyesore for residents and visitors. It's actually interfering with mobility and visibility for vehicles and pedestrians. The department has brush cutting and mowing guidelines that include visibility of traffic signs and passing clearances for vehicles. But I'm concerned, Mr. Speaker, that pedestrian mobility is not a priority, and I'll table those documents. Mr. Speaker, could the minister please confirm that his department is obligated to clear highway brush to ensure pedestrian mobility and not simply vehicle mobility?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, this province is subject to robust vegetation growth, which on the one side could be a blessing in many instances, Mr. Speaker. However, this government, in the previous budget, committed additional funds of over $2 million to brush cutting and vegetation control on our highway system. And I'm very happy to say that that is showing results, Mr. Speaker, across the province. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton, Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, as far as the robust vegetation growth, I can assure you that it's not being dealt with properly in my constituency. The situation might be less critical in my constituents if TIR had sufficient resources in our area. I understand that the department has only one mower available for 3 counties. It's absolutely ridiculous. When that mower inevitably breaks, the weeds and the brush don't stop growing, as the minister has pointed out. There's no backup, there's no plan B, and also there's a backlog basically in the system. Mr. Speaker, this is more than simply beautification. My constituency has a very high population of seniors, and mobility is important to their livelihood as well as their health. Could the minister please commit today to the acquisition of another mower for Cape Breton, Richmond, and the surrounding counties?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for the question. The commitment that we have made to increasing the availability of equipment for mowing is evident. Mr. Speaker, we are deploying more brush cutting. I think we got more brush cutting done in this season than we had for many, many years, and it's our intention. It's our intention to continue that, not only in the member's constituency, because the grass grows everywhere in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to cut it everywhere.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this week I questioned the Minister of Community Services about the Wood Street Secure Care Centre.
Order, please. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
A legal aid lawyer representing a young person held in the Waterville Youth Jail told a reporter that his client was offered a deal. She was told that she could sign a form promising good behavior and be released, but she refused to sign the document because she believed that her social worker would then send her to the Wood Street Centre. Mr. Speaker, this young woman chose jail over Wood Street. I want to believe the minister when she says the safety of the children in her care are of the utmost importance, but I'm not confident that they meet the standard when children would prefer to be in jail. Is the minister confident that children at Wood Street are receiving the therapeutic services they need?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for her question.
Order,
and I would
please. Time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call resolution number 46, election of Deputy Speaker.
Now call resolution number 46.
Mr. Speaker, I move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on July 5, 2018, the honourable member for Hants West was appointed to the Executive Council and resigned his position as Deputy Speaker of the House of Assembly. And whereas, pursuant to Rule 11 of the Rules and Forms of Procedure of this House, Deputy Speakers are to be elected by the House in the same manner as the Speaker. And whereas it is desirable for the House to elect a second Deputy Speaker as a result of the resignation of July 5, 2018. Therefore, be it resolved that the Speaker preside over the election by the honourable members of the House of a Deputy Speaker and Chairman of committees forthwith.
I will now accept nominations for the position of Deputy Speaker. The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Government House Leader for bringing this resolution forward. Of course, we need to have backup for you, Mr. Speaker. We wouldn't expect you, if we're filibustering something, that you spend all that time in the chair. So you do need a number of good backers in this. But what I will say is this. You know, it had been previous practice in this House of Assembly that the Deputy Speaker position was shared amongst the caucuses, so that we make sure that, of course, the independence of these things continue along, that each caucus has the opportunity to nominate someone to that position, and of course to share it amongst the 3 caucuses. That has been and had been a long-standing tradition, of course, in this House of Assembly. And for many years did we enjoy that, because you know there's not just, of course, the chair that you reside, that you spend time in, Mr. Speaker, but there's also the chairperson of the different committees, and sometimes those committees can get long as well, and they need backup. I will be nominating someone in a moment, but just to speak of that person maybe differently, but that person, of course, had already been a speaker in this House of Assembly for a number of years, is very well versed in the practices and traditions of this House of Assembly, and of course can represent that chair fairly and without reservation, which is why we continue. That's right. Which is why we urge the Premier, because I know he's going to make a nomination in a moment, but we urge the Premier to consider that. That had been a tradition until, of course, this Liberal government took power a number of years ago. So with those short words, I plead with the Premier again in saying that he in the gallery or outside has said that he wants to work with opposition parties, wants to be transparent with the things that happen in this House Assembly, and I suggest that it should start right here with a nomination of all parties to participate in Deputy Premier.
Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. I will now accept nominations for the position of Deputy Speaker. The Honourable Premier.
This is the third time, Mr. Speaker. I'll get it right this time. Mr. Speaker, I nominate the member from Halifax Atlantic.
Does the member for Halifax Atlantic accept the nomination?
I do. Thank you.
Are there any further nominations? The Honourable House Leader for the official opposition.
I would like to nominate the member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Does the Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg accept the nomination?
I do, Mr. Speaker, and I have my stump speech ready.
Are there any further nominations? The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I wish to place in nomination the name of the member for Truro, Millbrook, Bible Hill, Salmon River.
Does the Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River accept the nomination?
I do.
Are there any further nominations? Hearing no further nominations, the clerk will now conduct the election for the position of Deputy Speaker. The clerks will distribute ballots to each member. You will write the name of your chosen Deputy Speaker, and the clerks will collect it in the official receptacle. The members will place the name of the nominee on the ballot. Just while the clerk is collecting the ballots, I'll remind the House leaders that they're invited to join the clerks outside of the chamber for the counting of the ballots. Order, please. The clerk will now read the results of the election of Deputy Speaker.
The House has elected as Deputy Speaker the member for Halifax Atlantic.
I declare the member for Halifax Atlantic elected as Deputy Speaker. Just before we move on to government business, the honourable member for Dartmouth East on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction. In the West Gallery, we have two amazing young Nova Scotians that care deeply about their community. We have Riley Hill-Pettipaw, and Riley is heavily involved in politics, and I know he cares deeply about the future of our province. So please give a warm welcome to Riley Hill-Pettipaw. And also, Mr. Speaker, in the West Gallery, we have a former student of mine who served as the Prime Minister in the Model Parliament at Prince Andrew High School back in 2014, I believe. And he's a great resident of Dartmouth, Mr. Speaker. He's the President of the Dartmouth South PC Association. He's the President of the St. Mary's Tories. He's the Vice President of the Dartmouth Cole Harbour Conservative Association. Not bad at all. So please welcome Tristan Shaw. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 10, the Liquor Control Act?
We'll now call Bill number 10, the Liquor Control Act. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm pleased today to rise to move second reading of Bill number 10, the Liquor Control Act. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, I introduced amendments to the Liquor Control Act that will reduce red tape for businesses and for the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation when they are wanting to set up establishments that manufacture and sell alcohol to Nova Scotia communities. Currently, Mr. Speaker, there are two situations when a plebiscite is required to be held before a business can move forward in a dry community. Number one, when the business manufactures or sells alcohol, or number two, when the NSLC wants to open in a dry community, those where the sale of alcohol is restricted. The requirement, Mr. Speaker, extends back to Prohibition and has become outdated. Nova Scotia is the last jurisdiction in Canada that requires plebiscites, which can be costly and add months to the time it takes to obtain the licenses and permits required to open a business. In addition, with changing municipal borders and varying requirements for plebiscites in communities, navigating the landscape has become very challenging for emerging businesses. The amendments will eliminate the requirement for a plebiscite to be held prior to a business manufacturing or selling. Requirements to obtain licenses and permits, Mr. Speaker, and to follow municipal zoning bylaws remain unchanged. Two consultations were held with the municipalities and policing authorities, one in 2015, one in 2016, by Service Nova Scotia. Most did not respond to the request for input. In fact, of the 65 letters requesting outreach, only 20 responses were received, and the majority of those were asking for no change or were neutral. However, we recognize that there may be communities that feel strongly about not having alcohol permitted in certain areas. And so, Mr. Speaker, I encourage them to work with their municipalities to create additional zoning bylaws if necessary, which is the process that now exists in every other jurisdiction across Canada. This change that we are proposing today would come into effect on January 1 of 2019. And the purpose of that, Mr. Speaker, is to give communities and municipalities time to explore whether there is a need for any additional zoning bylaws. In conclusion, this change will allow businesses to better plan and make timely decisions when opening a new establishment, and it will shorten the time to get the appropriate license or the permit. These amendments will bring Nova Scotia in line with all other provinces, as it is the last jurisdiction in Canada to have liquor plebiscite requirements. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I will await the comments from opposition members and look forward to their support. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's my pleasure to stand for a few moments and speak to this bill. And, you know, quite honestly, since we did start talking about this back in 2015, I kind of almost forgot about it, thought it was already done. But here we are with the legislation that's before us to actually do it. There's only a couple caveats that I see here, and I know there's been some recognition that if communities are still feel such that they want to remain a dry community, that they of course can petition their municipality, and they can make a bylaw as such. But I do know that there's going to be maybe some challenges among some of those communities. The one I have as best example would be the community of Woods Harbour, Shag Harbour, those areas in my constituency, which happen to be a dry community. And you know, I know there's a number of the church organizations that are going to have a little bit of trouble with this, but again, it's good to know that there is provision in there that the municipalities can push this forward. On the positive side of it, there are a number of locations that would be great in the Woods Harbour area, by the way, for an agency store. So if the minister is thinking about moving forward on some of those, I think it's a good idea. So Anthony's Food Mark would be the one that I would suggest. It's a good place, and of course the owner's been trying for a number of years to get the department to come forward with an agency store for that area. So this takes one of those roadblocks out of the way. I do hope, again, as we roll around so many of these communities, as our burgeoning craft beer industry has the opportunity to do that. I mean, I take Tuscot Falls Brewery in my constituency, just in my neighbouring constituency in Yarmouth, where the member for Yarmouth is Heritage Brewery. That's only one of, I think, 3 in that community. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of growth within that community of brewers. And it takes people home. So in the Heritage example, a number of interested community members, actually educators and people got together and set up a brewery in Yarmouth. In my constituency, Tuscot Falls was actually a couple and some friends from out west. They're originally from the area, moved out west to work, and they came back and set themselves up in the community of Tuscot, not so far from my constituency office, which probably is not the greatest idea, but I get to walk over there and check out their product. But if this would have been in a dry community, they would have had a number of hurdles to go through in order to have that happen. So this does take that administrative hurdle out of the way. We become a wet province, and only the municipalities might be able to put some kind of prohibition on alcohol sales in their own communities, if so wished. So with this is, I think, a good move forward, and we look forward to supporting this as it goes through the process.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad that the government has taken the steps to bring our legislation in line with other jurisdictions, other provinces around our country. I hope that these changes do meet the needs of our municipalities across the province, and I also respect and understand that there may be those organizations, groups, individuals within our communities that do want to continue on or have the opportunity to advocate for maybe a dry community, that there is an avenue for that through the municipalities around the province. So this legislation is not limiting or not allowing that to happen. So we look forward to hearing anybody who might have concerns on this piece of legislation at law amendments, and we look forward to it going through the process.
If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Finance, it will be to close second reading on Bill number 10, the Liquor Control Act. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do want to thank the members opposite for their comments. And I do want to speak just briefly to something that was mentioned by the member from Barrington. And it had to do with the growth of breweries and wineries across Nova Scotia, in particular rural Nova Scotia. It is a growing industry. We want to make sure that following the proper procedures that they are able to establish their business without a lot of red tape or without a lot of time delay in order for a plebiscite. The last number of plebiscites that have been held, the voter turnout was between 10 and 30%, which tells you that there's not much interest in getting out to take part in that plebiscite. So in order to, as I said, facilitate the businesses who want to open those wineries or breweries, or for the business that wants to build a lounge or a beverage room or whatever, they have the ability to do that. I do want to also comment on the member from Cobequid, Sackville-Cobequid, and that was reference to law amendments. And we see here the time for implementation to be January 2019. That's to give that period of at least 3 months for communities to listen to this and to determine what they next want to do with respect to their municipalities, and also the opportunity provided to them at law amendments. So we believe that giving that 3-month period there for law amendments and or anything else that can happen within a community with their municipality, we do want to make sure that people have that opportunity. And so with those few remarks, appreciate the support from the opposition parties, and I close debate on second reading of Bill 10.
Motion is for a second reading of Bill number 10, the Liquor Control Act. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 10, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call Bill number 13, the Daycare Act?
We'll now call Bill number 13, the Daycare Act. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 13, amendments to the Daycare Act, now be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to be in the House today to speak about these small but important changes to our Daycare Act. We have a vision for early learning in this province, Mr. Speaker, that these changes fit importantly within. A vision that ensures safe, high-quality programming for children and families who choose to access them from one end of the province to the other. While many of these amendments are considered routine and are related to modernizing the language within the Act, there are significant impacts associated with the amendments that I do want to draw the House's attention to. First, we are looking to change the name of the Act. Mr. Speaker, we want the Daycare Act moving forward to be called the Early Learning and Child Care Act. This is a name that better reflects the inclusivity of our programming and the breadth of the services that we do provide, Mr. Speaker, under a jurisdiction of this legislation. It also aligns with our commitment to ensuring quality, nurturing, and inclusive early learning environments for our children. From regulated child care settings to pre-primary to approved family home child care settings, we have varied early learning opportunities, Mr. Speaker, to meet the unique needs of each and every family and community in this province. The most important amendment we are proposing is to enhance the regulatory authority of the Department for Family Home Care Programs, Mr. Speaker. Family home child care agencies licensed by the province have over the years provided support, oversight, and inspection services to family home child care programs. These amendments proposed will give the department an enhanced role in monitoring, coaching, and supporting agencies through the inspection process, which will increase our ability to ensure high-quality, safe, healthy programming from one end of the province to the other. This is a check and balance with the system, and this is something, Mr. Speaker, that the agencies themselves have indicated they would welcome as a change. Our child care programs are safe, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure parents and communities of that, but of course we don't want to take that for granted. These amendments will strengthen our partnership with family child care agencies to ensure that quality continues and that agencies feel supported in their work with approved home family providers. These amendments are just one example of some of the major changes we have made over the last year to support regulated child care in our province and early learning in Nova Scotia. As you know, we've undertaken some significant initiatives, Mr. Speaker. We launched a new funding model that focuses on quality outcomes for children and introduced an early learning curriculum framework that funded centres will be required to follow. in their program delivery. We invested close to $3 million in converting underutilized childcare spaces to better meet the needs of communities, resulting in more spaces for infants, toddlers, and pre-primary children needing before and after school care. We have increased our investments in the subsidy program by over $5 million per year to ensure more families have access to early childhood education. We've committed over $7 million to grow regulated childcare by 1,000 spaces in the coming year, Mr. Speaker. And we are pleased to say that we are well on our way with over 300 spaces already being created in the province. We have 300 more childcare spaces now than we did in the previous year. And with a high number of partners coming forward indicating that they want to partner with us in enhancing and expanding regulated childcare, I know that we will be able to reach our target of 1,000 new spaces. And this is in areas where there currently isn't childcare that's offered, Mr. Speaker. Again, 1 in 4, before we brought in the pre-primary program, only 1 in 4 of our preschool age kids were able to access childcare and early learning, and we are improving that situation for Nova Scotia families. We've committed to engaging and growing our early childhood education workforce through increased marketing, overseas recruitment, launching bursary programs, and increasing the number of ECE seats available to people interested in pursuing this important and meaningful career. Overall, the investment in the regulated childcare sector, and this is on top, of course, the millions that we've invested in pre-primary, is approximately $65 million right now, Mr. Speaker. And with pre-primary coming into Nova Scotia, with the increase in the regulated childcare sector, we're creating 500 new jobs for early childhood educators in this province, and we are expecting some retirements as well in the coming years, and that will open up spaces for another 200. So there's never been a better time to get into early childhood education in this province, and I'm really excited that now we have competitive wages and job opportunities that are meaningful, and many of which can provide benefits and job security to employees. This is a great opportunity for young people to get into this important and critical line of work, Mr. Speaker. And I know that we had a chance to speak about this earlier in question period, but we're happy to also open our arms in our pre-primary program to over 3,000 more students this year that will be coming in to access pre-primary in Nova Scotia. We know that this program will have an impact on those, particularly those that need a little extra help out of the gate. I want to thank Family Home Child Care agencies for the important services they have provided, and I know will continue to provide. I'd like to thank the Family Home Child Care providers for the support they offer families in their communities. And finally, I would like to thank and acknowledge our early childhood educators for the quality programming they provide in so many of our communities across the province. And particularly, I do want to thank our competent and caring staff at the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. I've had the great opportunity to get to know the folks that work in our early learning branch, and they're so committed to the success and well-being of our children. They inspire me each and every day to do a better job as minister, Mr. Speaker, and I'm so pleased I've had the opportunity to work with them as we improve the overall child care and early learning environment in this province. These amendments, Mr. Speaker, are all about continuing to enhance the measures we have in place to provide safe, quality early learning opportunities and ensure that our ability to oversee, monitor, and guarantee high-quality, safe environments for child care and early learning is reflected in the law, Mr. Speaker. So thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hearing the comments from the members opposite.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honoured to rise this afternoon to speak on Bill 13, an act to amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes of 1989, the Daycare Act. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for his remarks on this bill. On the surface, Mr. Speaker, this bill appears to be a housekeeping bill, clarifying language and modernizing terms and placing gender-neutral pronouns in the text. This is only proper, Mr. Speaker, and it's good to see government reviewing legislation to ensure inclusive language and, of course, to ensure we're maximizing inclusive learning environments throughout our province. However, Mr. Speaker, in some respects, I am concerned that Bill 13 is a consequence of the rushed implementation of pre-primary last year. My time in this legislature has taught me that the devil is in the details, and that often when legislation is rushed through and not thought out and planned properly, you can leave some gaps. Certainly looking at the rushed implementation of pre-primary, we see gaps with rules around catchment areas. We certainly see gaps with respect to that piece of legislation when it comes to access to playground equipment. So keeping that in mind, Mr. Speaker, Bill 13 appears to be mostly housekeeping, and it appears to be good for children under the care of daycares, so long as it doesn't present an unreasonable regulatory burden for agencies on program delivery, Mr. Speaker. Upon reading the bill, Bill 13 does not immediately present any additional red tape burden on childcare agencies, but as we all know as elected officials, we have a responsibility, Mr. Speaker, to be attuned to the concerns that are out there, to consult and listen attentively to the concerns of childcare providers in this particular case. So, Mr. Speaker, we encourage the legislative process to unfold. The official opposition wants to see what issues emerge with this bill at law amendments. We want, Mr. Speaker, to consult and to listen to childcare workers. Bill 13, from my reading, Mr. Speaker, is, theoretically provides the department with more powers to oversee inspections, to identify cases where practices may be an issue, and to act quickly to resolve those cases. The official opposition, Mr. Speaker, wants to hear from the childcare provider community. There's some questions that arise when one reads the bill. Are these amendments creating twice the work? Are there additional costs, paperwork that could impact program delivery? And will the changes in Bill 13 discourage new childcare services or drive others out of the market? So, Mr. Speaker, Bill 13, my take on it is a roadmap, and as I've noticed is the case with much legislation brought before this House by this government. We need to ensure the details are looked after, Mr. Speaker. So, of course, we need to wait and see specific regulations to be set out before we can get a true sense of the changes that will impact the agencies, providers, parents, and children. So, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, let the legislative process unfold. Let's consult and see what emerges from law amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the minister and my colleague have both said, this is essentially a housekeeping bill, although I do recognize that it does contain some important language changes. Some of those are just legislative housekeeping in terms of putting the bill in gender neutral and clear language, which as a former lawyer I appreciate. The one change that is really important here, and I congratulate the government on recognizing this, is the change of the name of the Act itself. Language matters, and early childhood educators deserve recognition for being the educated, hardworking professionals that they are and for the vital work that they do. And too often when we talk about daycares or childcare, there is a sense that these important professionals are babysitters, Mr. Speaker, and I assure you that they are not. So I do congratulate the government on making that change. I think it's an important one. Beyond that, these are mostly routine changes. More oversight on its face is good. I agree with my colleague that the devil will be in the details, so we'll see how that unfolds both for the agencies and for the regulated childcare homes. But, Mr. Speaker, in an environment where it's still difficult for many families to find affordable and accessible early learning opportunities, particularly for younger children, I suggest that bigger changes are needed. 300 spots is something, and I congratulate the government on their movement towards more spots for early learning and infant care in particular, but it's not enough, and it's not affordable enough, and it's not accessible enough. And to further exacerbate that, it appears that some poor planning has led to serious labour force issues in that area. So, Mr. Speaker, we appreciate most of these changes. We look forward to seeing them unfold. Like my colleagues, I look forward to hearing further comments from parents, early childhood educators, and other workers in this sector at law amendments, and to seeing the legislative process unfold. So with those few words, I'll take my seat. Thank you.
Time to recognize the Honourable Minister of Education. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 13, the Daycare Act. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I do want to thank the members opposite for their thoughtful commentary and general support for this piece of legislation. Our government has made significant investments in affordability. We have enhanced the subsidy program to reach more families. We've changed the thresholds for that subsidy program so that more lower and middle income families are able to access the highest level of subsidy available. So this is all about making this program more affordable, making more accessible by expanding spaces. We have 300 new spaces now. We will have 1,000 or more by the end of this year. That is our goal. To make sure that these services are available and affordable in every single community in this province, Mr. Speaker, and it's been far too long that we have been without this essential service in our province in every single one of our communities. I do want to comment that we don't need to. There is no legislative changes needed to make. That are needed to be made in order to enhance that affordability aspect or accessibility. We can do that within the parameters of the current legislation. What this legislation does is ensure that we are able to ensure quality, safe programming in home care spaces, Mr. Speaker. And we work with our partners, the agencies, to provide those inspections and to make sure that every single person that is receiving funding and subsidy and involved in a business, not-for-profit, or working for a government program knows that they have a responsibility to adhere to the highest safety and quality standards, Mr. Speaker, and this will help us and this legislature together ensure that that happens. So thank you very much again for the thoughtful commentary. I appreciate the support of the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, and I move to close second reading on Bill 13.
The motion is for second reading of Bill number 13, the Daycare Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 13, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 120 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Daycare Act.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask that we recess the House for a few moments.
Is it agreed? It is agreed. The House will now recess for a few moments. Order, please. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes government business today, and I move the House now do rise and reconvene on Friday, September 4th, between the hours of 9 and 1, following daily routine and question period. We will deal with Bill number 23, the Canadian Free Trade Agreement Implementation Act, Bill number 29, the amendments to the Labour Standards Code Act,
Bill number 27, the Animal Protection Act. Bill number 16, the Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Protection Act. And Resolution 50, amending Rule 60. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is for the House to now adjourn to rise tomorrow, September 14th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.